The Whispering Mask of Marbury Manor, featuring Jane Parsons. Chapter 1. The Summons from Whitehall. It was on a rain-slicked October morning that Private Investigator Jane Parsons received the letter that would lead her to Marbury Manor, and into one of the most unnerving cases of her career. She was seated in her office with her favoured cup of Darjeeling when the envelope arrived. It was cream, thick, and unmarked except for a pressed wax seal, deep crimson and bearing the unmistakable crest of the British government. She broke it open with her silver letter opener, a parting gift from her late mentor at Scotland Yard, and read, "Miss Parsons, your discreet reputation precedes you. A matter has arisen in connection with one of Her Majesty's most confidential operatives. Mr. Thomas Blackwell, a diplomatic courier under special assignment, has vanished without explanation from the estate of Lord Ambrose Marbury in Dorset. While local authorities have accepted the incident as a simple disappearance, we fear otherwise. The household has grown reticent, and whispers of a supernatural variety have begun to reach us. We would request most urgently your presence at Marbury Manor. You will be received as an antiquities specialist sent by the British Museum to consult on a certain artefact in Lord Marbury's possession. Kindly refrain from correspondence. A first-class rail ticket is enclosed. A carriage will meet you at Wareham Station. L.E. for Whitehall Intelligence Committee." Jane folded the letter with precise fingers and reached for her cup of tea, though her mind was already racing. She had encountered espionage before, and murder more times than she cared to count, but when the government made use of words like supernatural, it was often a pretext, a smokescreen, or a trap. By that afternoon, she was on the express train to Dorset. The landscape flew by in shades of burnt gold and leaden grey. Church steeples and hedgerows blurred into a haze of mist and wood smoke. Jane reviewed the file she'd compiled from public records before leaving. Marbury Manor, ancestral seat of the Marbury family since the reign of Edward IV, was a sprawling Tudor structure surrounded by forests and moors. Lord Ambrose Marbury, a widower, had returned from diplomatic service in the Levant 5 years prior. His son, Victor, was a former army captain. Lady Evelyn Marbury, a cousin by marriage, was known for her delicate health and interest in spiritualism. But it was the recent rumours that unsettled her most. 3 deaths in 2 years, all attributed to natural causes, yet all occurring within the estate's east wing. And now, the disappearance of Mr. Blackwell. Most curious of all was the talk of the Whispering Mask, a supposed relic of Greco-Roman origin discovered by Lord Marbury during an expedition to Cyprus. Local legends claimed it had been used in rituals, some said for truth-telling, others for madness. Since its arrival at Marbury Manor, the mask had developed a reputation. Visitors claimed to hear soft murmurs when standing near it. Servants swore it moved of its own accord within its glass case. One maid reportedly fainted upon hearing her own name whispered in the dark. Jane was no stranger to superstition. As a child in Shropshire, she'd listened to tales of banshees and standing stones, but experience had taught her that ghosts were far less terrifying than human ambition. The carriage ride from the station to the manor took nearly an hour. The driver, a man of few words and many wrinkles, kept glancing at the trees that lined the long gravel path. "Don't stay too long," he muttered as they arrived, tipping his cap without meeting her eyes. "The manor doesn't like strangers." Jane stepped out, tightening her coat against the wind. Marbury Manor loomed before her, its turrets jagged against a storm-dark sky, ivy trailing down its flint walls like green veins. A stone gargoyle leered from the upper balcony. From within, the glow of lanterns flickered behind tall windows. A single bell tolled in the distance. Before she could knock, the door swung open. A tall, sallow man in a dark waistcoat stood there. His expression was unreadable. "You must be Miss Parsons," he said without warmth. "I am Fletcher, the butler. Lord Marbury is expecting you." She stepped inside. The air was heavy, rich with the scent of cedarwood, beeswax and something else. Something metallic. Above the grand staircase hung a tapestry depicting an ancient battle. But it was the case in the foyer that caught her eye. A glass cabinet standing alone, draped with a velvet cloth. Before she could ask, Fletcher cleared his throat. "You'll wish to freshen up, I imagine. Your room is ready. Dinner is at 8. And Miss—" He paused. "Yes, the east wing is closed. For your own safety?" Jane raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" But the butler had already turned, leaving her to follow in silence. Behind her, from the case she had only glimpsed, came the faintest sound. Not a voice, not quite. A breath, a whisper, as though something ancient had stirred. Chapter 2. Arrival at Marbury Manor. Jane stepped inside her room, setting down her small leather case. It was spacious but cold, the fireplace as yet unlit. Heavy velvet drapes covered the windows, and a faint musty odour lingered in the air. She pulled back the curtains and peered outside. The garden below was tangled and overgrown, the fountain cracked and dry, moss clinging to its sides like an emerald shroud. Her thoughts were interrupted by a discreet knock. A young maid entered, clutching a pile of freshly pressed linen. Her cheeks were flushed and her hands trembled slightly. "Good evening, miss. I'm Elsie. I brought your bed linen." Jane smiled gently. "Thank you, Elsie. Could you tell me a bit about the house? It seems atmospheric." Elsie hesitated, looking at the door as if checking whether Fletcher was near. "Begging your pardon, miss, but it's more than atmospheric. People say it's haunted, not just by the Colonel, but by something far older. That mask. It brings bad luck." Jane arched a brow. "The whispering mask." Elsie swallowed. "Aye, since it came, folks hear voices at night. One of the stable lads swore it whispered his name. He left the next morning, never to return. And poor Mr. Blackwell. Well, he vanished the same night folks heard the mask muttering." Jane made a note to speak to the stable hands. "What about the family? Do they seem concerned?" The girl's eyes darted nervously. "Lord Ambrose says it's nonsense, but he's pale and thin these days. Master Victor gets angry when anyone mentions it. Lady Evelyn, she prays more than ever. They're all pretending, but they're scared. I heard Lady Evelyn talking to herself in the chapel last night, saying the mask must be destroyed." Jane gave the girl a shilling, thanked her, and set about unpacking. Her mind was buzzing with details, rumours, whispers, disappearances. But the pragmatic side of her mind resisted the notion of curses. When the mantel clock chimed 8, Jane made her way to the drawing-room. The fire crackled warmly, and the scent of roasted game wafted from the dining hall. Lord Ambrose Marbury stood near the hearth, tall and gaunt, his silver hair neatly combed. Next to him was Victor Marbury, a robust man with a square jaw and piercing blue eyes. Lady Evelyn sat by the window, her hands clasped tightly, her face almost ethereal in the firelight. Lord Ambrose approached with a strained smile. "Miss Parsons, I trust the journey wasn't too arduous?" "It was pleasant enough," Jane replied. "Your home is quite remarkable." Ambrose gave a thin smile. "Marbury Manor has been in the family for generations. It has seen wars, celebrations, tragedies, but nothing quite like this. Plague of fear." Victor scoffed. "Father, must we discuss this at once? Our guest has only just arrived." Lord Ambrose waved a hand. "We must be honest. You are here to investigate the disappearance of Mr. Blackwell. The rest is noise. I only regret that such nonsense has found its way into our house." Lady Evelyn spoke up, her voice trembling. "It's not nonsense, Ambrose. You heard it yourself. Last night from the east wing." Victor's jaw tightened. "A draught through old pipes, that's all. Nothing more." Jane intervened gently. "May I see the mask after dinner? I have a keen interest in antiquities." Lord Ambrose hesitated. "Of course, though it's just a trinket, a curious artifact from Cyprus. I was advised to sell it upon returning, but—" He glanced at Victor. "My son insisted we keep it. A relic of our travels." Victor nodded, but his expression remained grim. "It's not the mask that's cursed. It's people's minds. They see what they wish to see." Before Jane could respond, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. A servant burst in, pale as a sheet. "Beg pardon, my lord," he stammered. "The display case, it's been smashed. The mask, it's gone." Lady Evelyn gasped, and Victor sprang to his feet. "What do you mean, gone?" The servant quivered. "And there was a sound, like someone whispering." Jane excused herself from the drawing-room and hurried to the foyer where a small crowd had gathered. The glass case lay in shards on the floor, and the mask, the eerie, hollow-eyed artifact, was missing. Jane knelt down, examining the broken glass. A faint mark, a smudge of dried mud, caught her eye on the floorboards. She traced it with a gloved finger, then looked around at the assembled household staff. Fletcher approached. "I heard it too, miss. A voice, low and rasping." Jane straightened, her gaze shifting between the broken display and the muddy trace. Someone had taken the mask. But was it human hands that did the deed, or something far older and darker, hiding within the manor's crumbling walls? Chapter 3. The Disappearance of Mr. Blackwell. The next morning dawned grey and dreary, with a fine mist creeping across the grounds of Marbury Manor. Jane woke early, her mind still spinning from the events of the previous night. The mask had vanished, and the whispers had returned, soft, insistent murmurs drifting through the corridor. After a hasty breakfast of tea and toast, Jane began her investigation. She knew that understanding Mr. Blackwell's disappearance would be the key to unravelling the mystery of the whispering mask. She first visited the guest room where Blackwell had stayed. The door was unlocked, and Fletcher informed her that no one had entered since the envoy's disappearance. The room was tidy, save for a layer of dust settling on the dresser. On the nightstand, Jane noticed a small leather-bound journal. She flipped through its pages, most filled with mundane observations, weather, the charm of the manor's gardens, and polite remarks about the Marbury family's hospitality. One page, however, stood out. October 14th. Something is amiss. The mask. I feel it watching. It's nonsense, of course. Still, last night I woke to a whisper at my door. Thought it was Lady Evelyn in the corridor. When I opened the door, no one was there, but the mask's eyes seemed to gleam through the darkness. I must keep my wits. I need to speak to Victor. There is more to this than he's admitting. Jane tucked the journal into her coat pocket, making a mental note to question Lady Evelyn about her nighttime wanderings. She inspected the wardrobe, finding it surprisingly bare. 2 suits, a travel cloak, and a pair of scuffed leather shoes. She knelt to inspect the floor and noticed something peculiar. A faint outline of mud on the rug, leading from the window to the door. She lifted the window latch and peered out. Below was the east garden, overgrown and neglected. Had someone entered, or left, the room through the window? Next, Jane decided to question the stable hand. He was a wiry lad named Charlie, brushing down one of the manor's horses. His hands were calloused, but his eyes were sharp and wary. "Charlie," Jane began, "did you happen to see Mr. Blackwell the night he disappeared?" Charlie glanced at her, then back to the horse's coat. "Can't say I did, miss. Only heard him. Round midnight I was out back, tending to the mares. Thought I heard footsteps crunch in the gravel path toward the east wing." Jane pressed him further. "Did you see anyone else?" He hesitated. I thought I saw a figure. white and gliding-like, gave me the shivers, but when I got closer, it was gone, just mist and shadows. Was it wearing the mask? Charlie shuddered. Couldn't say, miss, only that it didn't seem real. Jane's next stop was the chapel, where Lady Evelyn often spent time. She found the lady kneeling at the altar, whispering prayers, her hands clutching a small crucifix. "Lady Evelyn," Jane said softly, and the woman started, her eyes wide and glassy. "I didn't hear you come in," Evelyn murmured. "I wanted to ask about the night Mr. Blackwell vanished," Jane said, observing her closely. "He seemed to think he heard you near his room." Evelyn shook her head vigorously. "No, I was in my chamber. I did not leave. I swear it." She paused, biting her lip. "But I did hear something. Soft, almost like a song. It came from the corridor. I thought it was the mask." Jane remained calm. "Why do you fear the mask so much?" "It's not just the whispers," Evelyn replied, her voice trembling. "The night before Mr. Blackwell vanished, I heard it too, a soft chant, and I saw a figure wearing the mask moving through the garden. I thought it was a nightmare." "Did you tell anyone?" "I tried to tell Victor. He dismissed it, said I was overtired, but I know what I saw. I'm not mad." Jane proceeded to the study next, where Lord Ambrose sat at his desk, frowning at a pile of letters. "My lord," Jane began, "I must ask about the nature of Mr. Blackwell's mission. Why was he really here?" Ambrose hesitated, then sighed. "He was sent to investigate rumours of espionage. There was talk of someone within the manor, perhaps one of my staff, being involved in selling naval secrets to foreign agents. The mask was merely a curiosity, an item I acquired abroad. I never thought it could be linked to this madness." "Is it possible the mask itself is a cover for something more insidious?" Jane asked. Ambrose's hands shook as he massaged his temples. "If it is, I am blind to it. I only know that since it arrived, fear has taken root here. I fear not the mask, but the effect it has on people." Jane's eyes fell on a gap in the bookshelf. What should be there? Ambrose glanced over. "My ledger, accounts from the last 6 months. It's missing." Alarm prickled through Jane's mind. Who else would have access? No one, except Victor and Blackwell. He was verifying the manor's finances to track any discrepancies. That evening, Jane stood at the East Wing's entrance, determined to explore despite Fletcher's warnings. As she moved through the shadowed corridor, the temperature seemed to drop. She pushed open the door to the small gallery where the mask had been displayed. The glass case was still shattered, but on the floor, amid the broken shards, lay a scrap of fabric, black and velvet trimmed with gold. She picked it up, recognizing it as part of an old ceremonial robe. A sound, a faint whisper, curled through the air. She froze, straining to listen. It was a single word repeated over and over. Betrayal. Betrayal. The draught from the window caught the fabric, almost as if tugging it from her hand. Jane squinted into the darkness and saw it, barely visible through the window, someone moving in the garden, draped in black, the mask gleaming in the faint moonlight. She hurried outside, but the figure was gone. Only the rustle of leaves and the echo of whispers remained. A new question surfaced in Jane's mind. Was this truly the work of a haunted mask? Or was someone exploiting the legend to hide a far more human crime? Chapter 4. Ghosts, Lies, and a Hidden Letter. Night had settled over Marbury Manor like a suffocating shroud. Jane Parsons sat at the writing desk in her room, meticulously noting down the events of the day in her leather-bound journal. Her instincts told her that the mask itself was a distraction, a symbol being exploited to create fear. But why? What did the mask represent? And how did it tie into Blackwell's disappearance? The fabric scrap she had found was undoubtedly from a ceremonial robe, suggesting a deliberate attempt to create the illusion of something otherworldly. A knock at her door broke her concentration. "Come in," she called. Fletcher entered, bowing slightly. "Miss Parsons, Lord Marbury requests your presence in the drawing-room. There is to be a séance. Lady Evelyn insists it may shed light on the recent disturbances." Jane arched a brow. "A séance? I suppose I mustn't miss it. Thank you, Fletcher." The butler hesitated before leaving. "Miss Parsons," he whispered, "I don't hold much with spirits and such, but mind yourself. Things aren't as they seem here." The drawing-room was arranged in an arc, with a circular table draped in black velvet at the centre. Lady Evelyn was already seated, her fingers trembling as she arranged a set of ivory candles. Victor stood near the mantel, looking sceptical, while Lord Ambrose occupied an armchair, his expression stony. A guest had joined them, a woman of about 50, with a shock of white hair and eyes the colour of storm clouds. "This is Madame Rosaline," Evelyn introduced. "She's an acquaintance from London, highly recommended for matters of the spirit world." Madame Rosaline gave Jane a curt nod. The medium gestured for everyone to take their seats, then dimmed the lamps, plunging the room into near darkness, save for the flickering candlelight. As they joined hands, Madame Rosaline closed her eyes, murmuring words in French and Latin. The room fell silent, and Jane found herself more alert than ever, noting every subtle shift in the atmosphere. Suddenly, the medium's voice grew deeper, her body stiffened, and she spoke in a low, rasping tone. "Why have you come? This place belongs to me." Lady Evelyn shuddered, clutching Jane's hand with a white-knuckled grip. Victor muttered under his breath, but Jane focused on the medium's words. "The one who seeks will never return. The mask must stay, or blood will follow." A loud crash shattered the moment. One of the window panes had blown open, and the wind howled through, scattering the candle flames. In the ensuing chaos, Jane noticed something peculiar. Madame Rosaline was holding a folded paper in her lap, as if it had appeared from nowhere. When the séance ended, Lady Evelyn was nearly in tears. Victor scoffed and stomped out, muttering about theatrics. Jane quietly approached the medium. "You had something in your lap," Jane said pointedly. Madame Rosaline's eyes widened. I didn't place it there." Jane reached out and took the paper. Unfolding it, she found it to be a letter written in a shaky hand. "To whom it may concern, I have been deceived. I followed the trail to Marbury, but I fear I will not return. There are secrets in this house, deadly ones. If I do not survive, know that the mask is a lie. Someone is hiding behind it." T.B. Jane quickly realised who T.B. was, Thomas Blackwell. That night, Jane lay awake, the letter burning a hole in her thoughts. She could not reconcile the notion of the mask being a lie with the disturbing sightings of the masked figure. If Blackwell had indeed left this letter, it suggested he had uncovered something sinister. As sleep finally took her, she was awoken by a tapping at her window. Jane hurried to look out and saw a light moving in the garden. Grabbing her coat, she slipped through the corridors, careful not to alert the household. The wind had picked up, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth. She followed the light to the rear of the manor, where she found Charlie, the stable boy, holding a lantern and whispering to someone through a cellar grate. "Charlie," she called softly, and he jumped, dropping the lantern. "Miss Parsons, I was just checking the horses," he stammered. "Who were you speaking to?" "No one, just thought I heard something down there." Jane knelt by the grate and peered into the darkness. "Was someone down there?" Charlie hesitated. "I've heard odd sounds from the cellars at night. Sometimes footsteps, sometimes that whispering. Thought maybe it was the mask's ghost." Jane looked at him. "If you hear it again, come to me directly." Returning inside, Jane decided to explore the east wing, where the disturbances seemed centred. She moved cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rug. She noticed something odd about one of the wall panels near the gallery, a thin gap where the wood didn't quite meet. Carefully pressing against it, the panel slid open, revealing a narrow passageway lined with stone. The air inside was musty, laced with mildew and something sharper, kerosene. Lighting her small lantern, Jane ventured in. The passage led downward, curving in a spiral. At the bottom was a small chamber, and within it, an old ceremonial robe hanging on a hook and a rough wooden crate. Jane opened the crate and found a collection of notes and maps, detailed plans of naval ports and coded messages. She picked up a photograph, its edges worn. It showed Victor Marbury in military uniform, alongside a man Jane recognised as Blackwell. The door to the chamber creaked, and Jane turned to see Victor standing there, his face taut with anger. "What are you doing down here?" he demanded. "Looking for the truth," Jane replied calmly. "Did Blackwell confront you with this evidence? Did you harm him?" Victor took a step closer, his eyes dark and wild. "You don't understand. Blackwell was digging where he shouldn't. This has nothing to do with the mask. It's about survival, mine and my family's." "What did you do, Victor?" He looked at her, and for a moment Jane saw fear. "I didn't kill him, but someone else wants it to look like I did. They're using the mask to frighten people, driving me mad in the process. You must believe me." Before Jane could press him further, a muffled scream echoed from upstairs, cutting through the silence like a knife. Victor bolted, and Jane followed, both rushing to the drawing room. There, Lady Evelyn lay sprawled on the floor, a dark bruise blooming on her temple. A piece of black velvet was clutched in her hand, the same material as the ceremonial robe. Jane knelt beside her. As Lady Evelyn stirred, she muttered, "It was him, the man with the mask. He said I would die." Jane looked up at Victor, his face white as a sheet. Was the curse real, or was someone pulling the strings with deadly precision? Chapter 5. The Man in the Mirror. Victor knelt beside his cousin, his face a mask of guilt and confusion. "What happened, Evelyn? Did you see who attacked you?" Evelyn stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her voice was a thin whisper. "It was the mask. Walking. I heard it call my name. When I looked, he was there, staring at me through the mirror." Jane's mind raced. "Through the mirror? Which one?" "The long mirror in the corridor," Evelyn whispered, clutching Jane's hand tightly. "It was his face, Blackwell's face, but he was wearing the mask." Victor's jaw clenched. "That's impossible. Blackwell is gone." Jane's analytical mind was sceptical, but the detail about the mirror intrigued her. "Stay with her," she instructed Victor. "I need to see that mirror." Jane hurried down the hall to the east wing. The long, ornate mirror stood near the grand staircase, its gilded frame glinting in the dim light. Jane approached cautiously, her own reflection seeming oddly distorted in the warped glass. She examined the mirror's edges, noticing faint fingerprints smudged into the dust on the lower half. Kneeling, she tapped the frame lightly. The sound was hollow, confirming her suspicion. A secret panel! With careful precision, Jane pressed the ornate floral carving on the right side. The mirror swung inward with a creak, revealing a narrow passage. The stale scent of kerosene wafted out. She lifted her lantern and stepped inside. The passage was cramped, lined with decaying wood and dust-coated cobwebs. As she moved deeper, the faint sound of whispering reached her ears. She strained to catch words but could only make out fragmented murmurs. The corridor opened into a small alcove where she found an old oil lamp and a tattered map of the manor. Pinned to the wall was a note, hastily scrawled, "The mask is a ruse. The real secret lies behind the chapel's stained glass. Trust no one." TB, Jane's pulse quickened. Could it be that Blackwell had found this hidden passage before he disappeared? And what was behind the stained glass in the chapel? She heard a scraping sound behind her and whirled around, just in time to see a shadow flicker across the opposite wall. Someone else knew about the passage. After leaving the passage, Jane went straight to the library, where she found Lord Ambrose poring over old family records. He looked up, startled, as she entered. "Miss Parsons," he began, attempting to mask his nervousness. "Is there any news?" "Yes," Jane replied, "about the mask, and its connection to Mr. Blackwell. Did you know that the mask isn't ancient at all? It's a replica, a clever forgery made to appear antique." Lord Ambrose's hands shook as he set his pen down. "That's impossible. I acquired it during my time in Cyprus. The dealer assured me that it was genuine," Jane finished. "But the real artifact never left the excavation site. Your mask was planted here to cause fear, to cover up something else." He looked pale, his knuckles white against the desk. "You mean someone has been using it to manipulate us?" "Exactly. Someone who knew your love for antiquities and used it as a way to create a distraction. Who would benefit from your distraction, Lord Marbury?" Before he could answer, Fletcher burst in, breathless. "My lord, you must come to the chapel. Lady Evelyn has collapsed again." Jane and Lord Ambrose rushed to the chapel, where Victor knelt beside Evelyn's limp form. Jane approached the window cautiously, remembering the message. The central panel depicted an angel holding a sword, but something seemed amiss. The sword's hilt had been altered, almost as if it was designed to be moved. She pressed the hilt, and the panel swung open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth. Jane pulled it out and opened it to find pages filled with financial transactions and coded messages. "It's a ledger," she whispered. "Detailed accounts of arms deals and payments under the Marbury name. Someone was smuggling documents right under your nose, Lord Marbury." Victor's face darkened. "This can't be. Our family has no dealings with arms." Jane flipped to the last page. A single phrase was scrawled in the margin. "The whispering mask is merely a mask. Behind it lies betrayal." Just then, the faintest flicker of movement caught Jane's eye through the chapel window. A figure moved through the garden, wearing the mask. Jane motioned for silence and gestured to Victor to follow. They crept through the side door, circling around the fountain. The masked figure was moving toward the old stables. Jane caught up, grabbing the figure's arm and pulling. The mask fell to the ground, and underneath was Fletcher. The butler looked wild-eyed and desperate. "Please, Miss Parsons, you don't understand." Victor seized him, fury blazing in his eyes. "You've been terrorizing this house? Why?" Fletcher sagged, defeated. "I had to. Blackwell found out. I was paid to plant the mask, to use it to drive fear into the family, to cover up the smuggling operation. But Blackwell discovered the truth. He was going to expose me." "Where is Blackwell?" Jane demanded. Fletcher hesitated. "In the old root cellar. I locked him there after he threatened to tell Lord Ambrose." Victor shoved him toward the house. "You'll answer for this." They found Blackwell in the root cellar, tied and weak but alive. Once freed, he confirmed Fletcher's story. The butler had been blackmailed by a former associate to smuggle plans through the manor, hiding the records behind the stained glass. When Blackwell got too close, Fletcher staged his disappearance and used the mask to amplify the family's fear. As Fletcher was escorted away, Jane stood by the chapel window, reflecting on the intricate plot. Victor approached her. "How did you know?" Jane smiled. The mask was too perfect, a legend too easily believed. People are often drawn to the supernatural to explain what they cannot understand. But in reality, it was greed, plain and human. Lord Marbury joined them, still shaken. "The mask, then? Just a prop. Jane nodded. And a clever one. The real ghost haunting this manor was betrayal. Chapter 6. The Unmasking at Midnight. The discovery of Fletcher's treachery had momentarily lifted the oppressive cloud hanging over Marbury Manor, but Jane knew the truth was still lurking in the shadows. Although Fletcher had confessed to planting the mask and using it to manipulate fear, one crucial question remained unanswered. Who had orchestrated the plot? As the evening drew on, Jane sat in her room replaying the events in her mind. Fletcher's actions were those of a desperate man, but someone with more power and intelligence had to be pulling the strings. Fletcher was merely a puppet, one who had been caught far too easily. A light tap on the door roused her from her thoughts. It was Victor, looking more composed but still visibly tense. "I thought you should know," he began, hesitating. "Lady Evelyn is insisting on hosting the masquerade ball tonight. She claims it's tradition, some Marbury custom of honouring the dead. My father thinks it's madness, but she won't be swayed." Jane raised an eyebrow. "After everything that's happened?" Victor shrugged. "She says that abandoning the tradition would be inviting worse spirits to plague the house. I don't know whether to indulge her or put my foot down." A thought struck Jane. Let her host it. The masquerade may be the perfect opportunity to draw out the real mastermind. As midnight approached, the ballroom transformed. Gilded chandeliers shimmered overhead, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the parquet floor. The Marbury's guests, those brave enough to attend, milled about in elaborate costumes, their faces concealed behind colourful masks. Soft waltz music floated from the string quartet in the corner. Jane chose a simple dark gown and wore a feathered mask, her eyes keenly observing the gathering. Lady Evelyn, dressed in flowing white, looked spectral under the gaslights, while Victor opted for a more austere outfit, a dark suit with a simple black mask. Lord Ambrose, although reluctant, had donned a military dress uniform from his younger days, his expression one of weary resignation. Guests whispered about the rumours surrounding the mask, and Jane caught snippets of conversation. "Some say it's cursed." "Blackwell wasn't the first to vanish, you know." "Murdered, they say, but the body's hidden." She spotted Charlie, the stable hand, loitering by the entrance. He was out of place among the upper class, his eyes darting nervously. Jane moved toward him. "Charlie," she whispered, pulling him aside, "did you see anyone strange near the ballroom earlier?" He hesitated. "Saw a figure in a white robe, miss, out by the old garden gate. Thought it was a ghost. It was carrying something. A lantern, maybe." Before Jane could question him further, a hush fell over the room. The string quartet had stopped playing. At the far end of the ballroom, the double doors creaked open and a figure stepped through, a tall, imposing figure wearing the whispering mask. Gasps erupted around the room. Lady Evelyn swayed, clutching the nearest chair for support. Victor immediately moved to shield his father. The figure paused, head tilted, as if surveying the room. The mask's hollow eyes glinted in the candlelight. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the masked figure turned and retreated down the hallway toward the east wing. Jane took off after it, motioning for Victor to follow. They hurried through the dim corridors, past ancestral portraits, and down the grand staircase. The faint sound of footsteps echoed through the east wing, and Jane strained to listen. "There," Victor whispered, pointing to the chapel door, which hung slightly ajar. They moved cautiously, entering the candle-lit room. The stained glass cast eerie patterns on the stone floor. The figure stood near the altar, back turned, chanting something low and guttural. Jane advanced slowly. "Take off the mask," she commanded, her voice firm. The figure stiffened, then slowly turned. It was not Fletcher, but Lord Ambrose. Victor's face twisted with shock. "Father, what are you doing?" Lord Ambrose lowered the mask, his face drawn and weary. "I had to," he whispered. "It was the only way." Jane approached cautiously. "The only way to do what?" "To protect my family," Ambrose replied, sinking onto a pew. "The mask. No one was supposed to know the truth. Blackwell found out. About the ledger, about the arms deals. I couldn't risk exposure. Fletcher was supposed to scare him off. But it went too far." Victor shook his head. "You mean you've been behind this all along?" Lord Ambrose looked at his son, guilt heavy in his eyes. "It started as a way to protect us. When the mask was brought here, I saw an opportunity. The legend gave me a way to manipulate perceptions, to keep prying eyes away from the East Wing and the hidden ledger. Fletcher helped because I promised him a share of the proceeds." Jane's voice was steely. "But Blackwell didn't scare. So what did you do?" "I planned to send him away, bribe him, but he threatened to go to the authorities. We argued. He fell, hit his head on the stone hearth in the East Wing. I panicked. I had Fletcher move him to the root cellar. He wasn't dead, just unconscious. I intended to take him to London, but the mask's reputation, it spiraled out of control." Before Jane could press further, a new figure emerged from the shadows, Lady Evelyn. Her eyes were wide, but her expression was not one of surprise. "Ambrose," she said quietly, "you're lying." He looked up, stunned. "Evelyn?" She approached slowly, lifting a small pistol from the folds of her gown. "You should have killed Blackwell. You were too weak. You let him live, and that would have ruined us." Victor's face drained of colour. "Evelyn? Why?" Evelyn's voice was calm, almost serene. "The mask was just a tool, a way to keep everyone distracted. I knew Ambrose would try to bribe Blackwell, but I needed him gone. I staged the séance, made sure rumours of the curse spread. Fletcher was useful, but I had to tie up loose ends, and I have just killed Blackwell." Jane watched as Evelyn's fingers tightened around the gun. "And the mask?" "A perfect scapegoat," Evelyn whispered. "People believe in curses when they're afraid. I just gave them something to fear." Victor stepped forward. "Put the gun down, Evelyn. It's over." Before Evelyn could react, Jane swiftly moved, knocking the pistol from her hand. The weapon skidded across the stone floor. Evelyn sank to her knees, her composure crumbling. "You would have ruined everything," she sobbed. "I did it for the family." As dawn broke over Marbury Manor, the masquerade guests were gone and the police had arrived. Evelyn was taken away in silence, her face pale and haunted. Jane stood by the garden, reflecting on the case. The mask, now truly unmasked, was revealed not as a curse, but a clever ploy, a cover for greed, betrayal, and murder. Victor approached her, remorse etched into his features. "I didn't know. I never imagined Evelyn could be capable of such cruelty." Jane sighed. "Sometimes people wear masks far more deceptive than any cursed artifact." As the manor settled into an uneasy quiet, Jane knew the curse of the Whispering Mask had never been supernatural. It had been the manifestation of guilt, deceit, and the human capacity to betray. Chapter 7. The Final Confession. Jane Parsons stood by the grand fireplace in the drawing room, sipping a cup of strong black tea. The manor was oddly silent, as if mourning the loss of its secrets. Lord Ambrose sat across from her, his face lined with fatigue and shame. Victor stood by the window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Outside, the constables were leading Lady Evelyn to the waiting carriage. Jane watched through the window as Evelyn moved mechanically, her eyes hollow, mumbling under her breath. Victor finally spoke, breaking the silence. "I cannot believe it. All this time I thought the mask was to blame. I even suspected you, Father. But Evelyn—" He trailed off, his voice thick with disbelief. Lord Ambrose let out a heavy sigh. My poor cousin, I should have seen it. Her mind was never the same after that winter in London. She became consumed with preserving the family's honour, even at the cost of her sanity. Jane set her cup down gently. She saw the mask as both a weapon and a shield, a way to frighten people while hiding her true intentions. She manipulated the legend to mask her own ambitions. Victor looked at Jane with weary eyes. But why go to such lengths? Why orchestrate everything around that cursed object? Jane leaned back thoughtfully. Because Evelyn was caught between two fears, the fear of exposure and the fear of losing control. When Blackwell started investigating the financial discrepancies, Evelyn knew the truth would come out. Rather than confront it directly, she chose to nurture the fear of the supernatural. Fletcher was her pawn, coerced into aiding her through guilt and promises. Lord Ambrose looked at Jane, his expression a mixture of gratitude and regret. How did you piece it all together? Jane clasped her hands together. At first it seemed too convenient, the way the mask's legend was woven into every strange occurrence. Evelyn used it to cover her own actions, and the servants unknowingly perpetuated the myth. Fletcher, desperate to maintain his position, became the scapegoat. But the turning point was the masquerade. Victor frowned. The masquerade? Yes, Evelyn insisted on holding it despite everything. It wasn't just about tradition. It was her way of cementing the illusion of the mask's curse. When I saw the figure during the ball, I knew the real mastermind wouldn't reveal themselves so publicly unless they were desperate. And when Lord Ambrose confessed, it felt too rehearsed, like he was protecting someone. That someone was Evelyn. Ambrose lowered his head. I wanted to believe it wasn't her. She had been through so much. But deep down, I knew. I just couldn't admit it. Victor spoke softly. She always thought she was protecting us, but her love turned into obsession. Suddenly, a knock at the door interrupted their sombre reflection. A constable entered, tipping his hat. Begging your pardon, sir, but we found something in Lady Evelyn's room. Thought you'd want to see it. He handed Jane a small leather-bound journal. She opened it, skimming the entries, her eyes narrowing as she read. This is Evelyn's handwriting, Jane murmured. She kept detailed notes about the mask, her plans to manipulate Fletcher, her scheme to terrify the household, and even a record of Blackwell's movements. But look at this. She pointed to a passage dated 2 weeks prior. Fletcher is growing nervous. I must maintain control. If Blackwell digs further, I'll have no choice but to silence him myself. Victor must never know. I can't risk him suspecting me. I'll use the mask one final time. Victor swallowed hard. She intended to kill him all along. Jane nodded. Lord Ambrose closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging. She was more ruthless than I ever imagined. Victor's voice wavered. She thought she was protecting us, but in reality she destroyed us. The mask became her obsession, her way of controlling everything. I can't forgive her, but I can't hate her either. Jane looked at him kindly. Sometimes fear distorts love. Evelyn's need to preserve the family's reputation became more important to her than the family itself. Ambrose nodded, his eyes glistening. We must learn from this. I should never have let my own pride and negligence blind me to what was happening in my own house. Epilogue: The mask laid to rest. A week later, Jane returned to London. She placed the mask, now wrapped in cloth, in the British Museum's archives, where it would remain, a relic of fear, shorn of its sinister myth. In her office, she wrote the final notes on the case, reflecting on how easily the human mind could be deceived when haunted by its own conscience. The mask had never whispered. It had merely become a vessel for desperate souls to project their fears. As she put her pen down, Jane looked out the window, watching the city's bustle below. Sometimes the real curse was not an artifact, but the secrets people were willing to hide behind it. And with that, she closed the file labelled Marbury Manor, knowing that while the mask's mystery was solved, human nature remained the real enigma.